All right, well, welcome everyone. I will call our workshop number 1509 to order. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
We do not.
All right, so may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All right, I have a motion by Mike, and I think Jennifer, you are our second. Okay. All those are, well, we're going to do roll call. I got to remember that. Sorry. Since we're streaming this, we'll do roll call for all of our votes. So Karen Schuster's a yes. Mike Shamia.
Yes.
Jen Miller.
Yes.
Christy Watts.
Yes.
Kathy Lorenz.
Yes.
Matt Alonzo.
Yes.
And Mike Tishless.
Yes.
All right. Which takes us to 4.0, our discussion topics. And the first one is our IB program review. So Tony, I'll turn it over to you, or are we turning it over to Miranda?
Yeah, no, that's fine. So, we've been, over the past couple of years, we've been looking at using the language around absolutes, artifacts, looking at everything that we do within our organization, from, financial systems to educational programs. This is a conversation about that we need to have around the program of the way it's being delivered now is difficult in sustaining it. We're not saying the conversation is necessarily about getting rid of it. It's about that it probably needs to look different if we're going to move it forward. So that's kind of the conversation, and I think the why needs to be really clear on that. It's been a program in the district for many, many, many years, way before AP came onto the scene and other types of programs that afforded our kids an opportunity that maybe they other kids did not have. But as like all organizations and programming, things evolve, things change. So there's some things out there that are pulling at that and are competing against that program that we need to have a real serious conversation around of what's best for our kids and our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Eric, right? Yeah. Eric, you're going to kind of walk us through the presentation. And then I know Miranda's on here to answer questions, and Ronnie's on here as well. So we'll
perfect.
That presentation. Right. All the floor is yours, Eric.
All right, thank you. Yeah, just to kind of reiterate what Dr. Lake said. So we started having some conversations just within the building last year. I know that Miranda and I have discussed this quite a bit over the last 12 months. And last year we started doing some auditing of opinions because I think it's important when you have programs like this that you're investing in, that you always just double check and make sure that those programs still fit the needs of your school. And so we started talking to some kids, we talked to some parents, we talked to a lot of teachers last year, just kind of get their opinion of where they thought we were with the IB program. And then, as most of you know, we've been doing a lot of different things at the high school, a lot of different changes. And this is just one of those things that it felt like was important to kind of maybe set aside with all the other things that were going on. And so we're excited to have this discussion and see where it takes us. So if you go to the next slide, I just start by, I'm not going to read through this with you. Most of you are probably familiar enough from the program evaluations that we've submitted before with the basics of the IB program and its mission statement. I do think it hits on some words. If you kind of go through and pull out some important words, it just gives an overview of this program. Words like knowledge and inquiry and caring, really trying to, I think, develop the whole child, active and lifelong learners. And I think what you'll get from their mission statement is that it's a global program. I think one of the things about the IB program that's made it always unique is that it has always been something that's international and therefore global minded and challenges our students to think globally as well. So next slide, Colin, is the two different ways that students participate in IB at Lindbergh High School. The first is the IB diploma program. And in this program, students follow 6 subject areas that they have to complete. This is primarily done in the final 2 years of high school, your junior and senior year. Your There's a little bit of choice involved in your schedule, but when you're doing the IB diploma, you really are kind of locked into a small number of courses that you have to take in order to be able to meet the requirements of that diploma. In addition to that, there's the extended essay, there's the service learning project, which is CAS, and then there's the TOK course, which we do, I would say, in a year and a summer, because it is a course, I'll talk about this more in a little bit, but it's a course that's really designed, if you're doing IB to full fidelity, it's designed to be a 2-year course, but we do it really in 1 year. And then you have to successfully complete both the internal and external assessments in order to earn the diploma. For the most part, Lindbergh High School's had a pretty good success rate when it comes to students who actually go for the diploma. Most of our students historically get that diploma. Not everybody, but most. And so it's been a program that has done a lot of great things for many of our kids. In addition to that, and I think this is the part, and probably Miranda would agree with me, that many people forget about, which is that the IB program impacts our school beyond just the maybe small cohort of students who are actually in the diploma program itself. Students can take individual courses, they can complete the internal and external assessments in those courses, and they can actually receive certificates for that course. And we have a lot of classes like IB Math Studies, Global Politics, and IB Business that are good, strong courses for a large population to take as electives within our school, whether or not they are part of that cohort that goes for the diploma. Colin, if you go to the next slide. So again, why revisit this? And in short, I really, again, think it's important that we always look at all of our programs periodically. And this is a program, if you go back to the history of this particular program, IB has been around at Lindbergh for a long time. It is a program that has served many students very well. At the same time, we've now been doing it this particular way for almost 20 years, where we started offering a large number of AP courses. It was about 20 years ago that we really started to expand our AP offerings. And in order to make those programs work together, there were a lot of decisions made back then that were, I would say, accommodations that were made in order for us to be an IB school, but also to have a large number of AP courses. And so I just think it's important that we look at some of those accommodations that we're making, that those accommodations that impact our schedule, they impact our staffing, they impact some of our student choice. And we just need to make sure that at the end of the day, this is a program that still brings the value that we hope it does for all of our student body. All right, next slide. So this next series of slides is really going to kind of look at some of the goals of IB and how it applies at LHS. So I think everybody who teaches IB, I know that Miranda feels this way, recognizes that we are not doing IB entirely the way that IB was designed to be done. We have to make, again, some accommodations just based on the needs of the other programs that we have. And I should have said this in the previous slide, in the last just few years, we've added a lot of other programming options for kids. And some of those programming options are also really popular and could potentially be pulling away from the IB program. I think of, for example, just off the top of my head, the growth of our biomedical Project Lead the Way class, which is now in its 4th year at the high school, and is a program that once kids get into that and they really find out how exciting it is and how hands-on it is, many of them want to see that through all the way through the 4th year. And we've had a pretty good retention rate. And so classes like that, along with some of the other opportunities that we're giving to students here as we try to become even more comprehensive, is a potential barrier for getting more kids into IB. And so one of the goals of IB is to foster the 3 pillars of an international mindedness, multilingualism, intercultural understanding, and global engagement. Again, this is, to me, one of my favorite things about IB, is that It does challenge our students here in the Midwest of the United States to think globally and to push beyond their boundaries and to do some learning that they might not otherwise do. I think one of the challenges, though, is that because these courses are taught in some cases simultaneously with AP courses, we're probably not really getting the full effect of this. When we are teaching a class that is maybe also a class in which we're teaching a similar AP class just to make those classes work, and it's taking away a little bit from the curriculum of what IB is supposed to be. Next slide. Next goal of IB is that students who successfully complete IB courses earn college credit or placement with IB test scores. We've definitely had students over the years who have benefited from having that opportunity that comes from IB, where they can go in and walk in with significant college credit. Some of the feedback we're starting to get from our students, however, is that they're not getting that same return maybe than what they used to. That we're not getting the college credit that many students thought they were going to get when they entered the program. We also have other classes like AP that still gives students opportunities to get that college credit. We've expanded our dual credit options as well, so that students can take Lindbergh High School classes taught by Lindbergh High School teachers and earn college credit that is guaranteed to them before they even walk outside of our doors. So while we've expanded our opportunities for getting college credit, IB seems to, at least based on the feedback and some of the students I've spoken to, it doesn't seem to be giving that same reward that maybe some people assume that it's giving when it comes to college credit. Next slide. Next goal of IB. Teachers learning through professional development opportunities about curriculum changes, new teaching models, and to learn from experts around the country and the world. Again, this is one of the most exciting parts of IB. I think IB has made a lot of our teachers better teachers because some of the things they do are, for lack of a better phrase, really, really cool. And things that maybe some of our teachers wouldn't be exposed to if they did not get a chance to participate in this program. On the other hand, again, because many of our teachers often have to simultaneously pay attention to two different curricula in the same course, it's really hard for them to put some of those things that they are learning into full practice. Just to give you the example that's listed here, teachers are asked by students to be a mentor for their extended essay, but because we have a relatively small number every year who are actually doing that extended essay, it might be that a teacher who teaches IB only is a mentor once every 3 or 4 years. And so it's difficult for them to become an expert on how to really help those students effectively write that paper. And therefore, many of our teachers are probably just, through no fault of their own, not really annually prepared to give the best mentorship in this. So the limitations, again, sometimes compromise, I think, the great intentions of the program. Next slide. To provide 2-year deep learning experiences in academic content such as science, math, global politics, world languages, and theory of knowledge. And so I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges we have at Lindbergh, in that IB really is designed to be a deep dive over a 2-year period. And in order to make that happen, a lot of their courses are designed to be 2-year courses. And we are not, either A, in some cases, able to accommodate that. And so we squeeze a 2-year course in some cases into a 1-year course, or we ask kids to come in and do a little bit of work over the summer to try to squeeze in the missed learning that they would have gotten in that second year. Or we take an AP course that is originally designed, so we do this in chemistry and biology, for example. We take an AP course and we stretch that AP course, which was really designed to be a 1-year course, over the course of 2 years. And what that means is that kids who ordinarily maybe would have just wanted to take AP, but then also take a different science their senior year, end up in 2 years of biology, for example, instead of maybe taking a course in physics because they just don't have any room for it in their schedule in order to finish their AP requirements in some cases. So that has, I think, been one of the biggest scheduling challenges, is that it really leads to a lack of flexibility and choice for some of our students who would maybe have more choices if the programs were completely separated and we were able to do AP over here and we were able to do IB over here. Next slide. Okay, so therefore the options for the future of IB is, obviously there is an option that we can continue to do what we've done for 20 years or so, which is to have a dual honors program where you have AP and IB kind of melded together, and you have to accept the fact that IB will never be done completely the way it was designed to be done, and that students may not be able to participate in some courses because IB impacts their AP classes and limits their choice. Option 2 would be to fully separate the IB and AP program, so creating a completely standalone IB program that is independent of all AP courses. Because one of the things I didn't mention, which I think is an important and I think powerful challenge with IB, is that we literally have kids in the same class. I just want to make sure this is understood, that are taking, for example, they may be sitting in an English class and half the class is taking the IB curriculum and half the class is taking the AP curriculum. And we literally have to have teachers who say, okay, so for all of you AP kids, none of this applies to you. I'm going to talk about something for the next 20 minutes, and I'm going to talk about something that really is part of the IB program and not really applying to you at all, and then vice versa. And so to fully separate those programs would allow for that to no longer happen and let AP kids do AP, let IB kids do IB. But in order to do that, it would probably require some acceptance of some small courses in some areas and potentially some extra staffing in order to really make IB work. And then option number 3 is to say that IB doesn't necessarily fit the needs of our school anymore, and that maybe there are other things that can provide the same rich experiences for our kids, either through something like the AP capstone course, because AP and IB are often in competition with each other. So AP is trying to enrich some of their experiences by modeling some new things, maybe in the same broad curricular approach that IB has often done. And so we could look at those types of programs to see if that's a better fit for our school. So that's an option as well, is that we just simply decide we have other offerings and we have other programs now that better meet the needs of our kids and maybe have meant that IB is no longer relevant to our overall student body. And I think is there one more slide or is that it, Colin? Next steps. I thought there was one more. Okay. So our next steps should be, and I think this is really important, engaging the community in a conversation about the future of IB and programs at LHS. IB is something that people are very passionate about, and understandably so. As I said, if you've been through this program, it can be a great program for kids, and it's had a positive impact on a lot of our very best students. And so, in truth, we've had many students who come to Lindbergh specifically for IB. So I think it's important that we hear those voices, but we also talk to students who maybe took the IB program and would maybe say, I don't know if I would do it again. I'm not sure if it was worth it for me. And getting that broad picture from all the stakeholders of how that program fits within our school and the needs of our district. And then therefore determine the best course of action that fits our strategic plan. And so those would be the recommended next steps. I don't know if if Ronnie, again, I do want to point out Ronnie Zagora and Miranda Gelvin both have been a big part of these conversations and were instrumental in helping to put this PowerPoint together. If they have anything they want to add, they're welcome to, but otherwise, I know all 3 of us would be happy to answer any questions you have.
So before we open it up to questions for the board, I just want to make a couple comments. So I do think it's really important that our community understands, and people that maybe went through our community and had a great IB experience, that IB, and I've had one in particular conversation with a parent now of ours that went through it as a Lindbergh High School student. And what I described to her of what was going on was like, okay, that was not my IB experience. Okay, I understand, I see that. So I think, we have some very passionate people about this, and I think really educating them on how this program, when it stood alone without competition for college credit, was thriving. And it was awesome that Lindbergh was out there doing that for their kids back then. But we have opportunities for kids to walk out of our school as we continue to build our dual credit and our AP offerings, anywhere from 30 to 36 hours of guaranteed college credit. And I'm just going to speak as a dad. Obviously, my girls didn't go to Lindbergh High School. They went to a different high school, but both of them walked out of their high school with 30. I think Taylor was 33 hours. Mackenzie was 30. Mackenzie's going to graduate in 3 years. Taylor could have graduated in 3 years, but she chose to play a season of volleyball in 3.5 years. But that's money. That's, giving our families an opportunity to, start grad school earlier or do other things. So again, I think that I know we had that on there as leave it as is. I would have to be really convinced, and I think you as a board, we would have to have some really deep conversations about leaving it as it is. I'm not saying that it should go away. So I think it's really about, do we want to keep IB? And if we do, then we're going to have to put some resources and some money behind it so it can be offered with fidelity. And so AP can be offered with fidelity. And I'll just share some new learning for me in year two is that, a lot of high schools that I am familiar with, kids will take AP Lang their junior year, and then they'll take AP Lit their senior year, and that's comp 1 and 2. So lots of kids are walking out of high school not having to take an English comp class unless it's something with their major. So I just, I want to make sure that our kids, when they walk out, and as of all of you, that when they walk out of this door, they are in the most competitive position with not just peers in St. Louis County or wherever across this country and across this world, that they're walking out there, on a level playing field. And I think right now we have something that is kind of not allowing that to happen as it's offered as it is. So again, we're not saying that we shouldn't do it. We just need to make a mindful decision of how, if we are going to, know that it's going to be resources and that it needs to look differently. So now with that, with me framing some of that, I think Eric and Miranda and Ronnie are the better ones to answer questions, but I think it's important that you hear, and you guys have heard this, we've had this conversation to a certain degree, a little bit in our touch base meetings, but I just think it's something that we need to really make sure our community understands the why. It's really important.
Does anybody have any questions?
I do. I'm kind of curious what our enrollment numbers look like for IB and how that compares to like AP or even just college credit courses, and how beyond college credit an IB diploma really benefits our students. Like, does it change their college experience in any way? And I would also like to say it does concern me that we are making accommodations to the program other than how it was intended to be done. It seems like to me that's not like within the spirit of how it should be done.
And I agree with that. I think one of the things that wasn't mentioned was with those compromises, we have turned it into a program for the elite to thrive in. And IB's intentions is for it to be a program for highly motivated learners all the way up to your elite level learner. So we are excluding a lot of students from having the opportunity to participate because of the way we do it, that some of our average learners who might be really motivated for something like this just couldn't keep up in the pace of the courses because of the way that we do it. In terms of participation, this year was a little interesting because of Corona. So I will speak more to last year. We had 17 diploma candidates and 83 students who sat for exams, subject certificates, versus we gave almost 1,000 AP exams this year. We have 10 diploma candidates, and we've lost quite a few with Corona and who actually finished their coursework since there were no IB exams offered. They did not give any external assessments this year. So our numbers will look a little different next year based off the students who submitted internal assessments.
Miranda, how many new kids are going to go into the program next year?
So next year we have 3 students who have decided to be diploma candidates, which is a very low number. Subject certificates, I would have to look at the enrollment for those specific courses, and those vary. I say they are in the 50 to 80 range each year, depending on how many students are taking IB Business, Math Studies, and Global Politics as standalone courses. The next year, the following year, I have a much bigger interest in students who want to be diploma candidates. This year's biggest competing issue was the Project Lead the Way courses and the number of students who took English 3 PBL, which if they do that, then they cannot be diploma candidates. So they met all of the requirements except for that. And so then they won't complete the 2-year sequence for the English literature portion.
You know, sorry, if I can add to that real quick. One of the things that when I was talking about this with Dr. Sparks, we were interested to see and go back to the days before AP, just curious to see what the number of candidates were back then. And so I was able to unearth some data. I think I found it in a time capsule that was dug up once construction started. But I found actually.
Hey,
yeah,
I was supposed to be 80 when that time capsule got dug up. All right, I'm only 50.
I think it had Dr. Lorenz's cheerleading outfit in it.
Yeah.
So in the numbers I found in 1989, which is the oldest information I could find, we actually only had 4 IB diploma candidates that year too. So when you really look back, it's been interesting to see that there are years where there are 4, and then there are years where there are almost 20, and that pattern has been sustained, I think, throughout, which surprised me a little bit. You know, that's a little bit before my time at Windberg, and I maybe kind of was under the impression that we had more candidates back in those days.
Well, and I can say back when I was there, I think we were combining classes back then too, because I feel like the numbers were so low in IB, our AP and IB, and then you had the choice to take the IB certificate. So it was kind of the same way when it started out, maybe separated a little bit. Now it's come back together and you're blended again. So do we know why, if students choose to take the IB certificate course versus or test versus an AP test, is there any data on why they choose one or the other if they're not doing the full diploma?
Yeah, so if a student is not a diploma candidate, we would encourage that student to take the AP exam. There are different types of tests. A good example would be if you're taking AP Calculus and you took the AP exam, you would get, and did well on it, 5 hours of calculus credit, potentially at your university of choice. However, with the IB, that IB mathematics test at the standard level is that 2-year course. So that starts with the pre-calculus, and it only covers the first 30% of the AP Calculus AB curriculum. So they would get, in some places, just college algebra credit for that course, potentially pre-calculus depending on it, but they most definitely would not get calculus credit for the standard level mathematics test. So if that student is sitting in there as a non-diploma candidate, then they would definitely be encouraged because they're going to complete that whole calculus curriculum. And even if you are a diploma candidate and you plan on going into a math or science field, we would encourage that student to take the AP Calculus exam as well, because they're not going to place into a high enough course just with that standard level math course. And that's pretty consistent across all of the curriculums. There's a standard level and a higher level. Doesn't mean harder, it just means covers more curriculum. And so for the math, we get a handful of kiddos that might take the higher level exam and place into the calculus, but they still would be better off with the AP exam in that situation. So with the diploma requirements, the students have to take 3 higher level exams and 3 standard level exams. We only teach English and global politics at the higher level, so that's 2 of their 3. and then they have a choice in the other one. The most common places the higher level exams occur are in the modern language and usually in biology. That's a really common place as well.
When you all were preparing this report, what teacher input did you get for the report for tonight?
So we talked to a lot of the teachers we spoke to. Really, most of it goes back to last year when we were really taking, I would say, a deep dive. We went to every single department. We sat down and we gathered feedback from all of the big departments, especially. So we got a pretty good overview. And there are definitely some people who I think buy into the philosophy of IB, but I think there are many teachers who are really frustrated with some of the compromises we have to make in order to make this happen. So I would say a lot of the things, so for example, the whole slide that talks about college credit, most of that I am getting from teachers who are getting that feedback from kids. And so that's where some of that feedback is coming from, is our teachers are hearing from their IB students, and their IB students are saying, well, I didn't get what I thought I was going to get out of this. And so that, I think, saps some of the enthusiasm from our teachers as well, who recognize that we're not doing the program the way the program was necessarily designed to be done.
Yeah, because when you're talking about like the modern language, I know we talked about that, and I'm not going to know the right term for it, that foreign language proficiency certificate, which is separate from the IB, separate from the AP, separate from the honors when you're a freshman and sophomore. And it's just, to me, it seems like a discombobulation, and I can't imagine teaching in that capacity and saying, you 8 kids, here you go. You guys, here's your test question, which will look a little different. That would be absolutely exhausting. And like Karen said, it's been since the 1980s, that has happened. I trust you. I like what you were saying, Eric, about the next steps. Interesting perspective going back to this, Tony. Just as a student, like Karen and I were saying, I had a choice of going for IB, going for AP. I chose the middle one, which was the actual college credit classes, didn't sit for a test, 21 credits, finished a year early, came back, taught at Lindbergh, and then taught the pre-IB, pre-AP classes. But then the kids that had the most success were the ones that took the UMSL class for me for credit for political science. So, I mean, I would love to be a part of your next steps, because I have the perspective, obviously, of the parent and the teacher and the student. But it's time to not put IB behind Lindbergh High School if we're not doing it with fidelity. So
what I would say is what we're looking, this isn't a vote, but just kind of a thumbs up from the board to go have this conversation and continue to explore the IB conversation on what does it look like for us.
And as you explore, you'll also define, aren't there specific costs with the programs, right? So that'll be part of the information that's presented. Okay.
Yeah, how many teachers we would need to add.
Well, even as it exists, maybe I'm not remembering this correctly, but are there specific PD things that teachers have to do if they are teaching and they're only taking that professional development because they teach an IP class? Okay.
Yes, every year curriculum changes, we'll send teachers out for updates on curriculum changes, or any teacher that's entering new to a subject, we'll send that teacher out as well.
Okay.
I just wanted to add, I want to thank you for looking at this, having kind of feeling the frustration of a student who's taken that second year of chemistry next year for AP. I really appreciate you guys looking at this. And it is very confusing, when you try to talk to parents about IB or AP. Well, I don't really know, but just go check it out. So I do think it's a good program. It's probably even better if it's done the way it should be. As we move towards the future, if it's chosen to stand alone, I think, then we build a great business model there too. We have that business piece in there, but I know we also have that other business curriculum. So I am in favor, yes, of taking a look at it moving forward.
If I could add one more thing too, just because there's obviously a lot of unknown related to this, but there's one thing I am 100% sure of, and that is that I have a phenomenal honors coordinator at the high school. And I am very convinced that if you guys come back to me and say, create a standalone IB program, that Miranda will create a great program. And then if you say that we need to make IB go away and go a different direction, then we will have a phenomenal honors program to meet the needs of every single one of our kids. So we've got the right person in the job. And I think no matter which way we go, we're in really good hands.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And Miranda.
Yeah.
All the good work. All right, is that all on the IB program? Anything else anyone wants to discuss? Hearing nothing, we can move on to 4.02, which is our reopening school task force update.
Colin's moving my screen around. I had to find my mute button or my unmute button. For Ronnie and Eric and Miranda, you are welcome to stay on, but please don't feel like you need to. You're also welcome to watch this live via YouTube if you'd like.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm going to go through what we've been doing so far with our reopening schools task force, kind of some beginning steps and the direction that we want to go, and what we've learned so far and what we anticipate is coming next. So Colin, if you could move forward for me. All right, so just kind of some background on our timeline. We started this process, actually we started it a little bit earlier in May as we started building task force membership, which I'll get into in the next slide. But our first actual meeting was on May 27th, where we spent a lot of time introducing members. We have a very large task force membership, so needing to know who else was a part of the team and what expertise they brought to the table as we start to talk about what does school look like when we come back in August. Obviously, we know how school ended in an entirely virtual system at the end of this school year. And as we look to the future, we want to make sure that we are providing great instructional opportunities, high quality learning environments for our kids. And that is the ultimate goal of this task force, is to do that while keeping our kids and everyone within our school community safe. So we started with introducing our members and then moved to discussing options. So these were just some initial brainstorms on what school could look like coming back in August, and then shared out our communication plan, because communication obviously is going to be a big part of this. Communication within our task force and among all of us, as well as what that looks like as we're sharing our information with the community. And then last week, we actually had the chance to start looking at the survey data. If you remember, at the end of the school year, we had our research partners, Hanover, share a survey with our parents, our students, our staff, to kind of gauge what's the community feeling right now around reopening. So obviously we were able to get some feedback about how virtual learning looked in fourth quarter, but we also really wanted to see what were people thinking as we think about August. Now, we do not have that data back yet from Hanover. They're not anticipating that analysis from them will be completed until the end of June. But I was able to go into the portal and at least pull out some of the primary data that we knew we needed, and I'll share that here with you today. And then again, using the feedback that we'd had from our first meeting, reviewing options, what do we definitely want to take off the table based on those initial conversations. We meet again tomorrow, and because we're meeting every Wednesday. So from here, we're continuing to narrow the options of what school looks like in August, and then delving into real subcommittee detail work about what are the recommendations that we need to take into consideration for teaching and learning, for facilities, health and safety, meal service and transportation, human resources and childcare, and then also communications. And then ultimately our plan is by mid-July, we are sharing out this draft with the community so they can see what the task force has developed and garner some additional feedback. Next slide, please, Colin. Probably one of the biggest things that we have heard from the community is a question about who's on this task force, how are people selected, and really want to go over that with you tonight. We have 61 members on our task force. We worked with principals to identify parent members as well as teachers and students. who would be able to give us a broad perspective. When I say that, it was really important for us to think about the varying needs of our families as we think about the future of coming back to school or potential virtual experiences, because we know that every situation is very unique and very different based on the age of children or the family circumstances. So we were very intentional about finding families who were representative of various programs. Do we have a family whose child is in the English language learner program, for example, special education? Do we have families who understand what gifted programming looks like and know and are coming at it with that lens? Obviously, the difference of what a parent of an early childhood preschooler would need versus what a senior in high school would need. And so being very targeted in terms of having that broad range of experiences and needs from our families, both on a family dynamic level as well as a programmatic level. So we have building representation from every building with regard to that. And it was really a puzzle putting this all together and trying to make sure that we could meet all of these perspectives, or have all of these perspectives represented. And then on top of that, we have some parents in the community who have great experiences outside of their role as a parent as well, and wanting to tap into that. We have parents who are in crisis management and are able to provide their perspectives on what it's looked like in reopening the programs that they have outside of the school environment. We have parents who are physicians working in infectious disease units, bringing a slew of information and expertise about health services. So all of that was really essential. And then, of course, we needed our programmatic leaders at the table as well, people who are going to be doing the work of ensuring that our reopening is successful. So our committee membership was very broad and very intentionally so that we could ensure diverse perspectives were needed. I know that there were a lot of people who had reached out and said, I'd like to be a part of this. And obviously with 61 members, it gets very cumbersome as it is. And our subcommittees are helping us to do this work in a manageable way. But we also have other people who, here's a perfect example. We weren't able to have a representative from every teaching field within the task force, just by sheer numbers. So we know that there are people that we're going to expect to bring in when we start talking about very specific programmatic things. Music, for instance, Linda Huck, our music coordinator, will come in and be a part of those conversations. So even though people may not directly be on the task force for the duration of the work, we're going to pull in those people who have specific expertise when we know we're needing to fine tune some details related to that. Next slide, please, Colin. So as I said, in that first meeting, we spent a lot of time with introduction of our members, and then we started to talk about what are the options. When we start to look at social distancing measures and know that we have some fixed capacity in terms of space in our building, what does that look like? How do we start looking at different options? How do we start thinking about, again, going back to the varied needs of families? What an elementary family with a kindergartner is going to need is going to look different than what a ninth grader with a freshman at or a parent who has a freshman at the high school is going to need. So these 5 options were kind of our starting point. And what we said throughout this is they are not necessarily the ending point. So this is just a time when we're going to talk about what are those options that we have, and then how we can blend these, how we can shift these, how they can, kind of morph as our conversations continue. That was obviously always open for further conversation. So we talked about everything from, elementary students being in school every day and spreading them out among more buildings, which would make for a more limited option for secondary to be in school. And you can see that's already an area that the subcommittee or the task force has said, no, 1 out of every 3 days of secondary students to be in school is just not enough. So that's already been crossed off the table. Looking at alternating day in-person versus virtual, so 1 to 2 day virtual and in-person option, or taking that same framework and looking at that by the week. So 1 week in school, 1 week virtual, and then alternate students in that way. For a little bit, we dabbled with the idea of an elementary half day, and universally people said, no, that is not going to work for our families. That is too cumbersome. And then paired with that, and again, these pairings can a lot of times go with a different option as well, was a secondary blended model where students might say, these are the classes I need to be in person for, but I can take these classes virtual and that will work for me. And then our final option was provide a virtual option and then a full day option, and families can just choose which one and how we would try to make that work within our schools. Colin, if you could move forward for me, please. And then in terms of communication, this is really important when we have a 61 member task force, making sure that as we are doing this work and as we're breaking out into subcommittees, that we really have a way to communicate what we're doing and also to make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes. So in terms of our meetings, we're ending every meeting with a common message. So even though we might be grappling with some things, every conversation in our breakout rooms might look a little bit different. So we're ending with a common message so that we're making sure that people are hearing what is factual in terms of what's happening and ensuring that it, I know there's a lot of fear for parents when we think about what's going to happen in August, and they're wondering about their own personal scenarios, and we need time to figure that out. So being able to have those meetings end in a consistent message ensures that maybe some ideas that are going to kind of die a quick death don't get out there and cause additional concern for families when they really have no viability. Subcommittees, one of the other things that we do since we meet each Wednesday is Thursday morning, we have all the subcommittee leaders come together in our cabinet meeting to talk through, okay, where are we overlapping here? How do we need to make sure we're communicating together and we're not, as I said before, stepping on each other's toes, that we're all moving in the same direction. And then finally, Beth is doing a fabulous job of sending out a weekly email summarizing this work, reminding people that we are taking feedback on an ongoing basis. Obviously, the survey was great feedback that we did back in May, but that was almost 3 weeks ago now, and the information that we have continues to change, and people's thought processes continue to change. So we want an opportunity for people to continue to give us feedback that can be directed to those various subcommittees. Next slide, please, Colin. And then, as I said, last week, we really spent a lot of time talking about the survey data. And I can't emphasize enough how this survey data happened, May 22nd or something along there. So again, a lot of things are continuing to evolve. But ultimately, we had almost 5,000 participants in this survey, which is amazing. And as you break it down, you can see that we had almost 4,000 parents, and then you can see the breakdown between pre-K parents, elementary, middle school, and high school. Now, some of our parents did take it multiple times because they might take it from the view of a preschool parent, and then they're also an elementary parent, so they want to take it from the view of that. So, but ultimately, it is representative of the various needs that our families have based on the level of their children. Students, not as many students took it, which is not surprising since it was after school ended. Usually when we get our biggest student turnout, it's because we're saying, hey, in your flyer time, let's all open up our computers and let's take this survey. And then almost 800 staff members really gave us a lot of feedback, primarily teachers. Other staff included both our classified and our certified staff, like counselors, people who aren't directly in the classroom on a day-to-day basis, but have definitely an instructional purpose in school as well. And then what you can see over on the side is the representation from some of the diversity of our families. So of the surveys, 91 of our families came from our ELL programming, so their children access that program. 402 families represent gifted programming, 568 special education. And then I thought this was really important to add as well. So although during the school closure, we provided hotspots to families who asked and devices as needed, we did have people still identify that they had limited internet access. And I'm making an educated guess here that a lot of that is broadband issues. As families were home and they were all drawing on the internet at the same time, there was a lot of stress on internet access in homes, and then limited devices. So kids who maybe were sharing devices and it made it more difficult. And then our free and reduced lunch population. This is the population of families that tend to have more socioeconomic needs. So those families are also represented within this data that I'm about to share with you. Colin, if you can go forward. As I said, Hanover is still doing a deep analysis of our data, but I was able to pull out the raw information on what our parents were saying. So I have 2 slides related to this, actually 4. One from the parent side and instructional staff side, related to 2 different questions. So this first one is, how likely are you to send your child to school if? And you can see the range of what parents said if we reduce class sizes. If we reduce class sizes and wear masks, what's noteworthy is that is actually reduced from reducing class sizes. Fewer people are in favor of class sizes and masks as opposed to class sizes only being reduced. If there were no other changes besides staff and students wearing masks, you can see 60% of our families were moderately to extremely likely to send their children to school. Strict social distancing versus social distancing when possible. So there is a reality that we're talking about kids being in school, and we've seen it out in the community that kids aren't also always social distancing outside of school. And so there is a reality that kids are going to gravitate towards one another in some way, shape, or form. So some data related to how parents feel about that. What if we made no other changes? We have a school structure in place that is exactly the same, except we are doing a deeper sanitation model. And then finally, if there are no changes made. So you can see that first row is the families who are moderately to extremely likely to send their kids. And then the bottom row are those who are slightly or not likely to send their children to school based on those different options. So this is another layer of information that we're using for our conversations within the task force. And then Colin, if you go to the next slide, you'll see what our instructional staff says about those same options. How likely are they to return to school? So this isn't about them sending their kids to school, but how likely they are to return to school. I highlighted the areas in red where there was about a 10% or greater variation from what the parents said to what the staff said. And really the trend here is that staff are more likely to attend if those measures in place than what our families are likely to do with regard to sending their children. So it just gives a good broad overview of the preferences when we look at the data in this way. All right, Colin, if you go to the next slide. So if resuming full-time in the fall is not advised, how supportive would you be of? And then this is all of the options that we would provide if we were unable to resume full-time in the fall. So whether families would be moderately to extremely likely to favor a virtual full-day program, a half-day program, which this would look a little bit, this would just be essentially not coming to school, but it's a half day of virtual learning that's scheduled. Alternating in-person with a virtual option, alternating weeks in person with a virtual option on the opposing week. So again, you'll see the correlation here to the options that we reviewed at the beginning of the slides. Elementary in-person versus limited secondary. If I were if I were going to guess, I would say that, again, not having seen how this data is broken down by level, my guess is that that number is reduced because secondary parents are probably concerned about what does this limited secondary experience look like for my child. And then a half day in person and a half day virtual option. Again, that goes back to that idea of splitting a half day in school and a half day out of school, which is an area that we've already deemed to not be probably as likely to be successful. And then if you go to the next slide, Colin, we have the same data, again, represented from the instructional staff perspective. So how supportive would our instructional staff be of these programs? And again, the red font identifies those areas where instructional staff were significantly, the data was significantly different from what parents said. And throughout that, it really just means that instructional staff is more in favor than what parents had said and related to those areas. And then moving on, some of the other data we looked at, we asked families, and I think it's, again, I can't stress this enough. This was almost 4 weeks ago that some of this data was collected. We asked families, what's your preference? Do you prefer a socially distanced school environment or a full-time virtual environment for your child? So 16.3% of families said a full-time virtual option is what they would be prioritizing for their children. There was another 18% who said they were not sure at all. And what's interesting about this is we've started to see some data coming out of other countries where they have opened school already. And the data is showing that more people will report that they would look at a full-time virtual option than the reality actually ends up being. So for instance, some of our colleagues were on a webinar a couple weeks, or actually I guess it was last week now, where in Denmark, 30+% of families said they wanted a full-time option as opposed to in-person social distance learning environment. And when all was said and done, they were hovering more in the 1% range. So I think that this is data that we have to be really cautious about as we take a look at it, and especially as new information continues to be shared about the spread of COVID-19. And then some other data that we really felt like was important that we looked at: busing data, childcare needs, so that we could address how we could support families in that regard. For almost 48% of our families said they need access to transportation. Another 14% were unsure, and of those, almost 40% said if transportation were not available, it would either be very difficult or extremely difficult to get their children to school. So those are all things that we've got to grapple with through our subcommittee work. Next slide, please, Colin. In the same way transportation is a challenge, we know, for families, so is childcare. A little over 4% of our families said they needed before school care. Almost 9% said they needed after school care, and 7.84% of our families said they need both, with another almost 12% of families unsure of whether or not they would need it. Of those families surveyed, 70% of those families who said they needed before or after childcare, 70% of them said it would be difficult, either extremely or very difficult, to find coverage if that were not available through the school. So again, this really informs the work of our subcommittees as we continue to try to find what's going to work best for a high quality and safe learning experience for our kids. Next slide, please, Colin. I'm sure this does not come as a surprise based on some of the things that I've been sharing, but overwhelmingly parents want students in school. And so that is driving a lot of our conversation and a lot of discussions that we are having. That's coming from the feedback that we're garnering from the survey, from the feedback form that Beth puts out weekly, and then also from the committee itself, from the task force itself. That is definitely a theme that is driving our conversations. And next slide. So as I said, where we're going from here is we are beginning to move into some of the subcommittee work specifically. So what I've done here is I've outlined the 5 subcommittees that are really starting to work on the details beginning tomorrow in tomorrow's meeting. And you can see the different areas that each of those subcommittees will be focusing on. And again, this was designed so that we aren't overlapping or being redundant in any of our work. A lot of things will fall into multiple areas, but this way we can collaborate easily and know when there are things that we need to really collaborate on. So for instance, I look at facilities, health and safety, social distance classrooms, the spacing. Well, that's going to obviously have a lot of intersection with furniture and what we're talking about in the teaching and learning side. So, but this gives each subcommittee kind of a focused area to know that they need to be making recommendations related to those different tasks. And then finally, I believe this is my last slide, Colin, our next steps. So as I said, working on the detail work, developing contingency plans. The reality is we know that whatever we develop for August, we're probably going to need to have some backup plans because you know, flu season will be right around the corner, and we're going to need to know what do we do when, what do we do if, and make sure that those are really well laid out. We did, I mean, this year it came at us fast and furious, and we did what we could in a short period of time. And I think there are definitely opportunities where we have to improve our contingency plans if kids can't be in school, what that looks like instructionally, what that looks like in terms of motivating kids, ensuring that high quality learning is still happening. So definitely some work to do there in supporting that process. And then in the end, we just want it to be a cohesive, sustainable model that can work for us as we make sure learning is our top priority. And I think that's it. Dr. Lake, anything you want to add?
What I would just say to the whole group and all 7 board members, I've had the opportunity to participate in some superintendent conversations from superintendents from around the country. And I would say the shift has really been, even where we were probably 7 to 10 days ago, has really shifted to really how can we make this work to have kids in buildings safely. the best way we can. And so that's when you look at our data from our survey, the two things that you really focus on is from our parents and from our instructional staff is if you can get those class sizes smaller and you can do your best to social distance, because strict and do your best is like a 0.5 difference of comfort level. And we're going to do it our best to be as strict with that as we can. But I'm also a realist and I live in reality. And when you start thinking about social distancing with kindergartners, how does that feel? And what does that look like? And do they really understand? I can't go, hug my friend and my teacher. So, just, what does that look like? And we'll do that. I think something that's important and people that are out there watching, we've charged our architect firm that we have on retainer to help us lay out our buildings properly, the best we can to keep that social distancing piece. So, no final decisions are made, but we're definitely trending in that direction with the idea that if you're not comfortable with this, then, here's this virtual option. And people need to understand that virtual option will not look like fourth quarter. And I've said this to many groups, and I'll say it to the few people that are out there in our community watching it. Online learning fourth quarter was really kind of by invitation because we were thrust into that environment. It will not be, if you choose virtual in the fall, it will not be by invitation. It will be a whole different type of experience for your kids. And so just knowing that, we've said all along and through all of our leadership for the past 2 years, it's about choice for our families, not being rigid, being as agile and being able to pivot the best we can in all situations. And so that's how we're framing our conversations with our group. And I will just say, we have some great thinkers in this group and are doing some really great things. And I think we're going to be able to provide our families comfort the best we can to say, this is how my kid can get their education in August, either this way or that way. And so we'll continue to work out the details. But I will say nationally, it has really begun to shift towards that. How can we do as normal as we possibly can do?
So any questions or discussion on this topic? No, going once. All right. So we can move on to 4.03, our board advisory committee process.
Yeah, so basically I just wanted to stay here is that, and if you're out there watching, when we established board advisory committees 2 years ago, we put half the committee members on a 3-year commitment and the other half on a 2-year. So ending the second year, there are now half the seats vacant on every board advisory committee, and information is going to go out shortly about how to apply again for a board advisory committee for those open vacant seats. And then I know there's some conversations with amongst the board of, which committees you guys are going to serve on, and we'll try to get all that kind of updated by the end of July with new committee members and all of that process. So I just wanted to kind of just say that for the public that's kind of out there watching, and for you 7 as well, of kind of where we're going with that.
And I'll just add to that, we are also kind of reorganizing our roles within the board on the various advisory committees. So when we're ready to go in July, we'll announce what advisory committees we'll all serve on for the coming year. All right, anything else on 4.03? If not, we need to adjourn this meeting. If I could have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
All right. So we'll go ahead and do roll call. I'm a yes. Mike Shamia,
Yes.
Jen Miller,
Yes.
Christy Watts,
Yes.
Kathy Lorenz. She's muted. All right, Matt Alonso
Yes.
and Mike Tishless.
Yes.
Okay. We'll go and say motion carries 6-0. Since we couldn't hear Kathy. So that is adjourned, and we are moving right on then to our special meeting 1510. So we'll call that to order. And 2.0 is our Board of Education candidate resolution. If Jen, would you go ahead and read that, honoring our 3 incumbents who are newly elected. Then we'll do our oath of office. Jen, you need to unmute. There we go.
I am. My screen wouldn't let me do it and look
Oh.
at the resolution.
Okay.
Resolution of appreciation. Whereas the Lindbergh Schools Board of Education is made up of 7 members who serve staggered terms of 3 years each, and whereas district residents Matt Alonzo, Kathy Carla Lorenz, and Christy Watts filed for the 3 3-year terms of office, and whereas their willingness to serve on the school board is an expression of the highest interest in the educational welfare of Lindbergh's youth. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education commends Matt Alonzo, Kathy Carlack Lorenz, and Christy Watts for their continued interest and support in Lindbergh schools and the education of all students, and for their willingness to voluntarily serve the people of the Lindbergh community.
Very good. Thank you, Jen. May I have a motion to approve that resolution?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, my screen totally froze, so I don't know who made the motion.
Matt, Mike,
Oh.
Tishless, and I both did.
Okay,
At
so
the
our
same
mics
time,
made
so.
our motion and did you get that, Laura and Andrea? Okay, so all those in favor, oh, I'm sorry, roll call. This is so hard to remember. I'm used to being in person. So Karen Schuster is yes, Mike Shamia,
Yes.
Jen Miller,
Yes.
Christy Watts,
Yes.
Kathy Lorenz.
She may have stepped away.
She's back.
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Thanks.
She's back. She froze. You froze for a second, Kathy. Matt Alonzo
Yes.
and Mike Tishless.
Yes.
All right, motion carries 7-0. So the next step in our agenda is that you will take your oath of office, and I recognize that this is going to be a little clunky, but we're going to do this over Zoom, and hopefully we'll stay relatively together as we say this. So we'll do it just like we do in person. I'll say a phrase, and you all repeat after that. Raise your right hand. So I state your name.
I,
I,
Matt Alonzo,
Kathy Lorenz,
And hopefully we won't freeze up too much. Do solemnly swear or affirm
do
do
solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and the
and the
Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and that I will, to the best of my ability,
and that I
and that I
will, to the best of my ability,
faithfully and impartially discharge
faithfully and
impartially
impartially discharge
the duties of a member of the Lindbergh Schools Board of Education
the duties
of a member of the Lindbergh Schools Board of Education
of the State of Missouri,
of
of the
the
State of
state of
Missouri,
Missouri,
according to law, so help me God.
according to law,
so
so
help me God.
Very good. You are all officially sworn back into office.
Thank
Yay!
Congratulations, but Karen, you got to do that again. They didn't stand up. They're supposed to stand up. No, I'm just joking.
I was going to say, somebody mute Tony. No.
Stand up, sit down, fight, fight, fight.
Yay. All right. So now 4.0, we adjourn Sine Die, and we will move on to our next meeting, number 1511, which I will turn over to Dr. Lake. And we'll
Thank you,
reorganize.
Karen. So this is the time for officers, and so I have the floor here, and I'm looking for a nomination and a second for board president.
I would like to nominate Mike Shamia for board president.
Second,
So now I believe I need to do a roll call vote, right, Karen? Yes.
Correct.
Yes, there we go. So I will go first. Karen Schuster,
Yes.
Mike Shamia,
Yes.
Jen Miller,
Yes.
Christy Watts,
Yes.
Matt Alonso,
Yes.
Kathy Lorenz,
Yes.
Mike Tishless.
As a brief statement before I vote, I wanted to inform everybody that I'm going to be voting, actually abstaining from voting during our officer election this year. Of course, I mean, this has nothing to do with our officers that have been being nominated. We have a fine board. We have a very collegial board. But my concern has been looking at the process by which such nominations are presented. And so hopefully down the road, we'll be able to kind of revisit this issue and maybe look at it from kind of a different way to carry it on. You know, we've done that just recently now with our board advisory committee assignments. And perhaps we could adapt something similar. So again, I mean, I'm going to sit back and abstain this year with the hopes that next year the process could be looked at and tweaked in terms of looking at board interest, board involvement, and so forth. So I am going to abstain from this vote.
Okay, I turn now the meeting back over to Mike Shamia.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Now we'll look for nominations for the office of Vice President. Do you have any nominations?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Karen Schuster.
Okay, second.
Second.
I'll second. Matt can have it.
Okay, did you guys get that? We'll go on to a vote. Mike Shamia, yes. Karen Schuster,
Yes.
Matt Alonso,
Yes.
Christy Watts,
Yes.
Jen Miller,
Yes.
Mike Tishless,
I'll abstain.
and Kathy Lorenz.
Yes.
Okay, congratulations, Karen.
Thank you.
Now do I have a nomination for the office of Secretary?
I'd like to nominate Matt Alonso.
Second that.
Nomination for Matt Alonso and a second by Karen. Nomination by Jen. Okay, roll call vote. Mike Shamia, yes. Karen Schuster,
Yes.
Matt Alonso,
Yes.
Christy Watts,
Yes.
Jen Miller,
Yes.
Mike Tishless,
Abstain.
and Kathy Lorenz.
Yes.
Okay. Congratulations, Matt, your secretary. Finally, can I get a nomination for the office of Treasurer?
I'll nominate Christy.
Okay, nomination for Christy Watts. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Kathy. Nominated by Jen. Roll call vote. Mike Shamia, yes. Karen Schuster,
Yes.
Matt Alonso,
Yes.
Christy Watts,
Yes.
Jen Miller,
Yes.
Mike Tishless,
Abstain.
and Kathy Lorenz.
Yes.
Okay. Christy Watts, the treasurer. Congratulations again, Christy.
Thank
It's a little
you.
awkward to vote for oneself, I know, so, right?
A little
Okay,
weird.
now we'll move to adjournment. There being no further business. Do I have a motion to adjourn special meeting 1511?
So moved.
So moved Kathy,
Second.
second. Second, Jen. Okay. We will adjourn and then, oh, roll call vote, sorry. Mike Shamia, yes. Karen Schuster,
Yes.
Matt Alonso,
Yes.
Christy Watts,
Yes.
Jen Miller,
Yes.
Mike Tishless,
Yes.
and Kathy Lorenz.
Yes.
Okay, This meeting is now adjourned, and we will see everyone again at our 7 p.m. regular board meeting. Thank you.